If you go back and look at the disciples, they were ordinary men, fishermen, gathered together by Jesus. As he was teaching, in some instances, if not most of them, they would not understand what he was teaching, even though they were in his presence. So sometimes just being in his presence doesn't mean that you understand, doesn't mean that you are hearing, doesn't mean that you are meeting his expectation. They were in his presence, and he would perform miracles, exhibiting power before the disciples, and still they would not understand even the meaning of the miracles. Some of the miracles, even with the disciples' participation, was an enactment of the lives of the apostles themselves. You look at Peter, he's participating in the walking on top of the water under Jesus' instruction. And when he walks on the water, a few moments later he's sinking. And then you hear Jesus later saying unto Peter, I have prayed for you so that your faith fails you not. That's the same Peter. You then begin to understand that him walking on water, there was a Peter that had faith that qualified him to walk on water, and there was a Peter that disqualified him from walking on water, even though he had been asked by Jesus to walk on water. So when you hear Paul saying, I am the voice that was sent by God unto the Gentiles, and then you hear Peter at some point saying, brethren, do you remember that I was once given the mandate to be the voice unto the Gentiles? You then begin to understand that the walking on water and the sinking on the water was an enactment of what would become of Peter. No wonder Jesus had to call Paul to minister to the Gentiles even before Peter had been shown the animals on the sheet. Now you must notice the appointment of Paul came before Peter refused to go to preach to the Gentiles. And sometimes this is how God operates. When he gives you a mandate or a responsibility, sometimes he will appoint another because he knows you more than you know yourself. Before you even respond to the calling, or before you even refuse to fulfill the mandate, he would have called another. But unfortunately, sometimes he doesn't take away your title. You remain with your title, and yet the mandate is gone. Now, these apostles left their families. They were following Jesus. There is a verse that makes me cry. Jesus says, how long shall I be with you? And you can tell the pain that Jesus had. He was looking at people that he had chosen to become his witnesses after he has ascended to the Father. But he is looking at the people and he cannot bear them. And he sometimes calls them little children. Sometimes he calls them faithless generation. and still they follow him. But do they understand his heart? Maybe not. He gets to a point where he says, there are many things that I would have loved to say unto you, but you cannot bear them. You cannot carry the burden. You cannot carry the words. So it means Jesus had an expectation of growth. He didn't pick them qualified. He picked them unqualified so that he could qualify them. And as they were growing, in as much as they were growing, but it seems as though their growth, though positive, was not enough to meet the desires of the Messiah. And hence there was a package for them that they never received, even though they were growing. So sometimes in your Christian walk, it is not just a matter of growth. At what rate are you growing? Is it the expectation of the Father, the rate at which you are growing? Because there are things that we may receive on the basis of growth, but there are also things that we may miss on the basis of the negative rate of growth. I don't know if somebody is hearing me. You will come to church, and yes, you are listening to me preach. Yes, you are growing. But is your rate of growth the rate of growth that the Lord projected for your destiny to be fulfilled? For your desires to be fulfilled? For his will to be fulfilled? Because many people have come into the house of God, and they have achieved the bare minimum of that which they could have achieved had they given the best of themselves, had they grown at the expected rate, had they developed at the rate that Jesus would have wanted them to develop. You look at yourself 20 years down the line as a believer, there are still things that even a grade 2 child in the things of God can do that you still can't do. Yet you are telling people, I have been a believer for 20 years. You then and you now, what is the difference? You 20 years ago and you now, how much more can you do now? How much more has the Lord expressed himself through you for you to say, I have been a member in the church of God for the last 20 years? The same demon that was bothering you 20 years ago is the same demon that is bothering you 20 years later. The same issues that affected your sister who is not born again, they are the same issues that are still affecting you today, 15 years later. Are you growing? Because had you grown, probably by the 5th year, there are things that God had prepared for you. But because you have not developed enough, you are aborting receiving those things, because you are not yet at the level at which God can trust you with that which he had ordained for you had you grown in the 5th year. They were ordinary men, and yet before them was God. You can't blame them. Even you, had you been with God, you would have been found wanting. These guys, when Jesus is talking about himself being the Son of God. They are thinking of a political leader. And yet his office goes beyond politics. When he tells them, I'm going to be leaving, they start thinking of who will take over. And yet they don't understand what he's saying. At some point, he tests them to see and check their rate of growth. And he comes and he finds the sick still sick, those in pain still in pain. And yet, people are saying, we are the fathers of the church. We have 50 years in this ministry. We know the things of God. Who are you? The disciples ran away the moment Jesus is captured. They deny Jesus the moment court begins. Fear is abound in their lives up to a point where they deny the Messiah. Thank God for John, Mary, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the few ladies that were there at that cross. But the rest of them were nowhere to be seen. They ran away because they feared their death. Like you. If death were to find itself in this place right now, most of you would run away. If money were to disappear in some of your lives, that will be the last of you. They were ordinary men. Remember Peter denying Jesus. But guess what? When the people heard the disciples speak in tongues, they gathered. It was around about 9 in the morning. And when the people gathered, there were now 11 disciples. And of the 11, they stood up, all of them. But one man started to speak. And where are they? In the same Jerusalem where he had denied Jesus before in fear of his life. But immediately after, Peter starts to speak. And he says, hear me, O men of Jerusalem. Hear me, O men of Judea. He's right there before them. The very same men that wanted him dead. This is a different Peter. He's standing before them in the same city where he denied Christ 3 times. What happened to you, Peter? Why change all of a sudden? Where did this boldness come from? We know you. Yes, probably as a fiery character, but that disappeared a few days ago. What happened to you?